pledged to appoint a royal commission on vivisection. If they don't announce one in a matter of days, he'll die. And he may well die anyway, such is his state of health. The fight for the rights of animals has created a new radical class across the spectrum, and they're supporting him with letters, cards, and the threat of more direct action. Here's Jackie Long.
All the trappings of martyrdom are already in place. His supporters stand in the candlelight to honour Barry Horne's sacrifice. 55 days without food, and the threat of death now very real. Fellow campaigner Alison Lawson has been visiting him every day.
He's feeling very rough and very weak. His eyesight is really bad again, and I've been reading his mail and cards out to him.
These pictures of Barry Horne were filmed secretly last week. With every day, his condition deteriorates. The hospital says he's seriously ill, but stable. Barry Horne, seen here on the right, became well known to police during years of militant activism. It culminated in an 18-year jail sentence for arson attacks on shops. Last month, in Full Sutton Prison in York, he began refusing food. His original demands for a whole series of changes to the laws on animal testing have been boiled down to just one: a royal commission on vivisection. The government said today it won't let policy be dictated by blackmailers. The rather awkward fact is that Barry Horne's demand for a royal commission is not one of the outrageous excesses of animal rights extremism. In fact, the government itself promised one, before it came into government, that is. Determined to capitalise on the increasingly broad church of animal rights supporters, it published this leaflet. New Labour would mean a new life for animals, and a royal commission which would review the effectiveness and justification for animal experiments. It's a difficult situation for Labour's Tony Clark. He's Barry's MP and shares at least some of his concerns about animal welfare.
Well, the current situation is that Barry wants the Royal Commission. Now, the government haven't ruled that out. They haven't said there won't be one, but for obvious reasons, they cannot respond to a demand. Now, there has been movement, and over the last 18 months, we have seen a stop to testing for alcohol use, for tobacco use, for aggressive weapon use, cosmetics and cosmetic ingredients. But what I hope is that we can get those in the animal welfare movement to see that there is progress and there is a momentum, and that we can take that work forward.
The death of Jill Phipps in 1995 gave the animal rights campaigners their first martyr. She was killed when she was hit by a truck as she demonstrated against the transportation of veal. Jill's mother is a close friend of Barry Horne's. She says his willingness to die for the cause has been heavily influenced by the death of her daughter.
Barry had a portrait of Jill over his bed in Full Sutton Prison, and he used to say to me that she gave him inspiration, and I can't believe that now he's lying only hours from death. I do honestly think that there will be such anger if Barry dies that, the police won't know what hit them.
The risks of working in animal testing are all too clear. These cars were blown up by the Animal Liberation Front in 1990. Now the industry is already preparing for the worst.
Well, if Barry Horne does take his own life in this way, it's likely that the extreme end in the ALF will get more militant, and we are warning anyone who's been a target of the Animal Liberation Front in recent years to be particularly vigilant about their security if this happens.
Because you expect further attacks?
It's difficult to know precisely what to predict, but I think we will see a situation, if Barry Horne takes his own life in this way, where the ALF want to seek some sort of vengeance.
The whole issue of animal testing has been brought in from the fringes in the past few years, and pressure on the government to act on animal welfare is much greater. Nevertheless, the vast majority of tests on animals are still for medical reasons, and that, according to one of the world's leading scientists, means they remain vital.
I object strongly to extremists blackmailing us like this. If the government gives way and establishes a royal commission, what else will it give way to? every extremist in the country will go on hunger strike for his or her cause. One has to stand up to extremists like the Animal Rights Front, even though many people are afraid to do so. I expect I will receive a load of hate mail tomorrow.
Tonight, though, at another vigil outside the House of Commons, the powerful allure of Barry Horne's potential martyrdom is winning over a new generation.
I do envy him for what he's doing.
You envy him?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could do the same, but I'm a bit young and can't really do it.
It's a dilemma for the Labour government. They don't want to give in to blackmail, but can they watch someone die? For a royal commission, they said they'd deliver.
That report by Jackie Long. Well, first of all, George Hurth, will you let Barry Horne die?
Well, the question isn't whether we let him die or not. The question is whether he chooses to go on with the hunger strike, and I hope he will decide to come off it.
But the point is, though, that in here is a statement by the government, while in opposition, while looking for people's votes, that you would support a royal commission. And there's no royal commission.
Well, we haven't ruled the option of a royal commission out. What we've said repeatedly is that we are working to an agenda in the meantime, given the resources that are available to us, to eliminate as far as possible. For example, in cosmetic testing we've already achieved that, in tobacco and alcohol we've already achieved that. The effort has to go into reducing the number of experiments rather than to the gesture at the moment of a royal commission.
Well, sorry, if it's a gesture now, then you didn't call it a gesture before the election. What is the problem with establishing a royal commission, which is not you saying we're going to end animal testing? It's a commission to look at it, and that is what Barry Horne wants.
Well, I've said that we will not rule that out. But the issue at the moment is we cannot respond to the pressure of somebody who's on a hunger strike, or for that matter, any act of terrorism. Because if we respond to that, then all policy making in the future could be dictated to by that kind of action. No government can submit to blackmail, and we certainly won't.
Rob, basically, in the end of the day, then, you will have to let him die.
Well, it's not our choice. He has the option, and I hope those who support him will join us in urging him to come off the hunger strike, and then we can all start to make some progress on an issue that there is a lot of areas of work that we can work together on.
Robin Webb from the ALF, this will give you another martyr. I mean, you can be quite cynical about this. This kind of adds to your cause, doesn't it, if he dies?
No, we're not going to have a martyr. We're going to have yet another casualty. And Mr. Howarth is quite wrong to say that tests on cosmetics and alcohol and tobacco have been banned.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been banned by the government. They've been voluntary.
Well, let's just stick.
Ended voluntarily.
Let's just stick to this.
Mr. Howarth made this point. And they've been voluntarily ended by the industry themselves. And I would, if I may also say, it was most unfair. At the beginning of the programme, we saw 2 cars car-bombed, and that was not the Animal Liberation Front. It was never claimed as such. And the only person ever convicted of placing an animal rights car bomb was a huntsman who said he did it to discredit the animal rights movement.
Let's just be quite clear. There is an extreme wing of the ALF, isn't there, called the Justice Department, who carries out acts of sabotage and terrorist acts in the name of animal liberation.
No, the terrorists are the people torturing animals behind the closed, locked doors of laboratories.
Okay.
If they have nothing to hide, why did the Animal Scientific Procedures Act make it an offence to reveal what goes on in laboratories?
If Barry Horne dies, do you abhor what Jill Phipps' mother said, that the police won't know what's hit them? Would you actively say now that if Barry Horne dies, you hope there is not another act of terrorism of any sort by animal liberationists?
If Barry Horne dies, I hope there's not another act of terrorism against all the innocent creatures, human and non-human, in this world. It is not blackmail. It is merely asking the government to honour a pre-election pledge. It could equally be said that a letter saying, unless you introduce a royal commission, I won't vote for Labour in the next election, that could be called blackmail. I find that an offensive attitude from Mr. Howard.
Andrew Blake, I'd like to bring you, you are part of the group that Stephen Hawkins is involved in, and you have a disease of the central nervous system. Why is animal research crucial to you?
Mine's a genetic disorder, and they've
they identified the gene that causes it. In 1996, they isolated it. They put that into mice. They are already making great strides in finding out what goes wrong in the living body. Now, people like Robin Webb will say, well, why don't you use people like me? Okay, fair enough. I'll tell you why. Because a lot of research, you have to put the animal down afterwards and do a post-mortem operation to find out what has gone wrong on a molecular level. Now, not many patients would be willing to put forward themselves. If there certainly would be no medical research who would terminate the life of a patient.
Now, Robin Webb, can you equate Andrew Blake's life and his life expectancy with the life of a mouse?
Well, I can't understand that.
Can you? And that's a straightforward question.
Let me answer this question then, please. I take Andrew Blake's point that I would ask for people like him to be used. My own sister was a spastic who never walked. I've worked both voluntarily and professionally for the physically... Allow me to finish, please. For the physically disadvantaged.
So
animals are not more important than humans. Individuals are important.
That patients go in for a post-mortem. Excuse me, but we're not a Nazi government here.
What I am saying, I certainly am not saying use you as a model any more than I would have said use my sister.
That's exactly what you are saying.
What I am saying is that, for example, the pharmaceutical company Siebes Geigy, in its own report, showed that 95% of drugs which had been tested and found both safe and effective on animals were dismissed as useless after clinical trials.
Let's just leave that particular point there and bring in Professor Martin now. You carry out animal experiments. If you knew that it was unacceptable to carry out experiments on animals, don't you think the medical world would make much greater strides in a synthetic form of experimentation?
Well, I myself try to do synthetic experimentation. I use alternatives to animal experiments. I use computer models, I use cells in test tubes in the laboratory. But at some point in the process of understanding human disease and therefore being able to prevent it, and I believe that's what the society of this country wants, I have to, regrettably, use an animal and experiment on it to understand the whole disease. Can I just comment on a philosophical problem that Robin Webb mentioned? I think in what he was saying, he was valuing animals equally with human beings. Now, I believe animals are valuable and I respect them, but I believe human beings are more valuable than animals. And I think 95% of all the people of this country will accept that human beings write poetry, they play music, they love each other in a constructive way, they plan for the future, and there is no evidence that animals do that. Therefore, I think it's quite legitimate, as man has used animals for food and for clothing over thousands of years, to use them for our good. What I can tell you is that I am very controlled, though, in the way I use them by the Home Office, and we have the best conditions for animal welfare in the world in this country.
Would you support a Royal Commission?
If the government thought it were necessary, I would support it.
But do you not think it's necessary to review and revise?
I think that the Home Office has a very good system of reviewing and revising the legislation all the time. I don't, particularly as a doctor and scientist working with animal experimentation, think it is necessary. If the country thought it were necessary, then I would go along with it and take part in it.
Very briefly, Andrew.
Well, as a patient, we did a survey of Nobel Prize winners in medicine. Of the 39 said that animal research was essential, and not one of them said it wasn't. So, whose side did we go for?
Well, let's just finally, I want to go straight to George House. No, George House, finally.
We have three to one here.
Do you, well, I think you've actually quite a lot to say, and I would like to put the last point to the Minister.
Where are the disabled people who are against animal testing? Where are the medical people who are against animal testing? And this is why we want a Royal Commission to have it properly discussed.
Minister, do you believe there's a hierarchy, like Professor Martin says? And
I think most sensible people would say that if the only way you can develop, for example, a new medicine or a new procedure it would have to use animals, then it has to be justified, yes. And in that sense, we've had some really good examples here today. If you can develop something that helps somebody who's already ill or prevents somebody from dying using animals, that has to be justified. But what also has to be justified through the ethical review process is that there isn't a viable alternative available.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed. The Sun sounds the Murdoch alert. The euro will rain down higher taxes on us, on food, on clothes, in our paychecks.
It's no use hitting them on the body because you just scrape your what's name, right? So the only place really you can hurt them, anyone,